Let's bring in Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, ProFootballTalk.com. Mike joins me here on the show. Mike, just your reaction to the story in the Detroit News about Matt Patricia.
I mean, it is amazing, Chris, in this day and age that it was kept quiet for so long. Somebody referred to it as a skeleton in the closet. This is a skeleton that was out of the closet. This is an indictment. This is a public event. It's a public record. It's a big deal. Guilt or innocence set aside, when a grand jury convenes and decides that there is enough evidence to conclude that there's probable cause to believe that the crime was committed, and an indictment comes and the case is set on a course toward trial, that is a big deal. The trial didn't happen. There was no opportunity for the allegations to be proven or disproven, but the indictment makes it a big deal. That causes it to take on a higher level of significance. And I think you were talking about the Lions not knowing about this. I think there's just a certain assumption that when a guy has a public life as a football coach and he's rising in the ranks and his name is coming up repeatedly for head coaching jobs, if there was anything like that out there, it would have come out at some point. And, if you're going to dot every I and cross every T, you are going to find this out. But I can understand why a team like the Lions would just assume that if this guy had been indicted at some point during his adult life, we would know about it by now, and we just simply didn't.
Okay, so how big a problem is this for Matt Patricia?
Well, from a legal standpoint, I doubt that there's any statute of limitations that hasn't run yet, either criminal or civil. So if the alleged victim at this point has a change of heart, I don't think that's an issue. But it's a PR problem for the Lions, for Patricia, and possibly for the league office. And we've seen how the league reacted to the Ray Rice fiasco from a few years ago. We've seen how the league has handled various allegations against players. It's much more a PR function than it is, at least in my opinion, an effort to get to the truth and mete out justice. The Ezekiel Elliott was a prime case of PR, trumping the idea of whether or not a guy actually did what he's accused of doing, because Ezekiel Elliott never got a fair chance to defend himself in that setting. So if PR takes over and this does unfold in a certain way for the Lions, if the alleged victim decides to go on 60 Minutes or ESPN or somewhere else and sit down and tell her story, and if she tells her story in a convincing way, regardless of whether or not it's actually true, that could be the kind of thing that creates a snowball effect for the Lions. So I think I understand why they came out with their statements last night. If I was advising Matt Patricia, I'd say you have to give a stirring, passionate, convincing shout from the rooftops, defense of yourself today, because that's what people who are falsely accused do. And then we just hope we can move forward and this dies down. But that's where PR, I think, takes a front seat and the legal system takes a back seat, because at this point it's not about the legal system, it's about the court of public opinion. A case that was never tried in a court of law potentially is going to be tried in the court of public opinion. And the Lions and Patricia, I think at this point, among other things, have to hope that the alleged victim doesn't decide to engage in that trial in the court of public opinion.
The Lions probably should have uncovered this, during their research on Patricia. But does a guy like Patricia going for a job like this, does he have a responsibility to bring this up, to get in front of it, or no? Well,
I don't think that there's a responsibility on him to wear on his sleeve things that would be readily available if a basic criminal background check was done on the guy. And there are certain limitations on what you should and shouldn't ask. And I remember when I was practicing law, there was kind of a line there between asking someone about convictions and asking someone about arrests, because a lot of people get arrested and a lot of those people never get charged, never get convicted, never are found responsible. This is the gray area in between, where you do have a grand jury that has determined that an indictment was required. And I'm in the process of getting my hands on the guidelines that the NFL gives to the teams about the things that can and can't be asked during an interview of a head coach. And here's the other thing, too. This isn't like an entry-level sales job somewhere. I have a feeling that as a practical matter, what gets asked of these guys is more perfunctory and more simple than what it would be in another setting, because, the Lions were determined to hire Matt Patricia from the moment Bob Quinn became the GM 2 years ago. And Bob Quinn has worked with him. Bob Quinn knows him. Bob Quinn isn't in a position where he's going to do the same kind of extensive background check that he would for somebody he doesn't know. And maybe that's the lesson for these teams going forward. You need to engage the procedures that are out there. It doesn't take much time. It's worth the extra little bit of elbow grease just to avoid the embarrassment. Because at a minimum, even if they had known about it and they would have hired him anyway, they're in a position where they can control the narrative, Chris, and they can get it out there on their terms instead of being caught flat-footed like they were last night when the Detroit News puts its story out.
Martha Ford is the owner of the Detroit Lions. She's been a strong advocate for domestic violence victims in the past. Do you think that plays a factor in all this as we move forward?
Well, I think it potentially does, but it all depends upon how big of a reaction there is. I think this is the point now where we just sit back and we wait and we see what kind of a groundswell there is or there isn't, directed at the Lions, directed at the league, what kind of public pressure is going to be placed on the Lions or the league to do something about this. And we've seen that in different situations. There is an intense amount of public pressure that comes to bear. How big of a story is it going to be? Are they going to cover it on the national network news shows, or is it going to be something that's confined to the sports media? I mean, these are all factors that I think for the Lions and the team and the league, rather, they just sit back and wait and see how it unfolds and how big of a story it becomes. And then I think you have to react to it if it does end up becoming a bigger story. And if it becomes too big and there are too many people who are saying this isn't acceptable, that's when the league office has to decide whether or not to make a difficult phone call to the league and say, you guys need to do something about this. But that's all to be determined. That's just one possible way this could shake out. But if I'm the Lions right now, Chris, I mean, I've got my list of all possible outcomes, and worst case scenario is, there's an overwhelming outcry, and we're in a position where we may have to do something we don't want to do.
Always great to talk to you, Mike. I appreciate the insight.
All right, Chris, take care, pal.
That's Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, ProFootballTalk.com, joining me here on the Dan Patrick Show.
For more Dan Patrick Show, tune to Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV or download the Dan Patrick Show app.